can't tell you. Well, I think our panel has affirmed my suggestion to you that they would bring you a lot of interesting information on the subject of engagement. Now, we want to give you an opportunity to pick their brains. Unfortunately, we only have one that I'm aware of, but we'll work on this, microphone. If that one worked, they could answer from there. Otherwise, I'm going to have to run back and forth. So what I'm going to do now is open it up to questions, and we'll try to get the mic to you. And then if that one doesn't work, we'll pass it back and forth.
I have a question for Ms. Handler, because in one of her earlier remarks, she raised a point that has been of great concern in Virginia. And that is a concern that a number of the management representatives in their organization feel that having a resident on the board of directors involved in discussions of what the payments are going to be required next year is a conflict of interest. And beyond that, a resident couldn't be counted on raising the fees for the next year, even though the community desperately needed it. So that was a very strong conflict of interest. Why in the hell will you ever want to have a resident in that position?
That would work.
Unless someone knows something I don't know.
I'd like to answer that, because you're absolutely right. That was something that was brought up many times, that there was an inherent conflict of interest because a resident on the board would want to have lower fee increases at all costs, and the board was looking to the long-range financial health of the community and needed to put money into updating and all kinds of things like that. Well, I think one of the answers to that is that it's really not very respectful of residents, because I think most residents realize that in order for them to have a home there in the future, it needs to be a marketable place, a place that is looking to its long-term health and not just looking to the short-term fees for that year. So I think that they underestimate the residents by making that statement. I've heard it often, and so far where the residents have really gotten involved in the governance of the community, you don't hear it anymore as much. So that was a fear that was very rampant in 2007 when we finally managed to pass the law. But you don't hear it as much today, as experience has shown that residents are not that inimical to taking care of the community. Does that answer?
Thank you. I have a question for Ms. Handler also. I wondered what the impetus was to the legislation in 2007. Had something happened at this, one of the other gals up there said they had a lawsuit at their community. So what had happened in New Jersey, or what was going on that got to the point where this law had to even become, I'm from Arizona and we don't have anything like this at all.
Ron, I think I've got a loud enough voice.
Okay, let her rip.
Okay. So far as I know, there wasn't any particular lawsuit or anything of the kind, but there had been concern for a long time. We had very good people who established the Organization of Residents Associations of New Jersey, and they were thinking ahead, and they said this is something that we need to do. And this was a kind of landmark legislation at the time. We're not even quite sure how many there were ahead of us. But the law did set up resident trustees with those responsibilities, as I pointed out. and also some others, including this of informing the residents of any changes, significant changes, before they are implemented. That's another important part of it, and that's one that is sometimes not observed.
I'll address my question to the panel. I served for 6 years as a resident director on the board of the community where I live. One of the takeaways I had from that experience was the number of board members that had very little knowledge of the needs and the interest of the residents in this community. That surprised me a lot. My question is, what is your take on that? And are you aware of any initiatives that are being taken to help board members to understand the needs of the community, beyond just the representation that the directors, of the resident directors bring to the table? Thank you.
Ron, that other mic will work now.
You want to give it a turn?
Okay, yeah.
Thank you very much. This isn't part of our topic to begin with, but I think it's brought up as an issue that is important. One of the things I learned as a resident rep was to have a great deal of admiration for the board and their involvement and their interest in the amount of time and energy that they spent on not only learning about the community and visiting the community, coming to semi-annual meetings, blah, blah, but also the goodwill that the board was exerted with respect to their responsibilities towards the residents. And many of them, we now have 2 people who have been on the board in the past who have moved into communities, one of our various CCRC communities. So they are very familiar with the life there. And I think it's, just as an interesting sidelight to that, Leading Age has had a task force over the last year talking about governance, and one of the things that major issues that they've been talking about is involving trustees in communities where they have perhaps not been very involved and have been on the board the way people are on boards. You know, you go sit on a board and you go home. But the fact that the Board of Trustees of facilities, communities like ours, really need to have a lot of involvement and know something about how the lives of the residents go.
And one thing that I neglected to make clear is that in our organization, we have one voting board member who is elected by the residents, but we also have a voting board member who is a resident who was not elected by that process, but was chosen to be a board member through the normal channels. So in our situation, we have 2 residents who serve on the board as voting members, plus we have the 5 representatives who attend all of the board meetings and who do share on a regular basis what is going on positively and what is not going on so positively in the communities.
Let me just add one other thing to that, and that is that I really think it's preferable if there are 2 resident board members, because it's very hard for one alone sometimes to carry much weight in a situation where there may be 15 board members and there's no opportunity to really have another person to corroborate what the first one is saying or add to it or something of the kind. And of course, then you can also have staggered terms. So that would be even better.
It's been a riddle to me why this is a thing of such concern. We as residents are the investors. We're the ones who are spending the money to keep these institutions going. And also many of us have had much more professional service than the members of the board have. And we have been in positions of accountability that many of the board members have never been in. And I just don't understand why it's such an issue. This organization in Terwilliger, Oregon, is that how I pronounce it? They started out with all the board members were residents. And they're doing wonderfully well. They, found out they needed to have an actuary and a lawyer and maybe some other professionals on the board. But they live right there in the community. And I was just talking to a lady today where her husband, and they're both residents of a CCRC in Arizona. Her husband is the chairman of the board. And I just don't understand why we should be having this confusion.
Who wants to take that?
Well, I would defer to the lawyers in the audience, but it's my understanding that something is where all the members of the board are also residents is defined differently by the IRS than something that has a nonprofit board from outside, where the residents are not a majority. So that they become, I've been told that the situation where all the members are from the residents, or even a preponderance are from the residents, that is defined as a mutual benefit association, which is a different kind of thing than most of us are defined as. So that's one issue.
I just wanted to respond to the gentleman's question about what's being done to help to educate the board members. Also, a law in New Jersey, which is when we had to have a representative from the board, is that they have to meet with us 4 times a year. The board has to meet either with the council or with the total association 4 times a year. And you can't meet 4 times a year and not learn a lot about each other. We have been meeting now 4 times a year for 4 or 5 years, is it, that we've had a representative?
Oh, probably a lot longer.
Yes.
Because this law was passed in 2007.
So the board knows a lot about us, and we know a lot about the board.
Somebody reach out.
I just want to applaud you for trying to get the residents on board. I work in a retirement community, and it's a co-op. And it is a resident-owned, resident-governed, internally managed community. So our board is made up of 7 members of the community, all nominated and elected by the committee, from the community, so they are residents. To go to this question over here, to your response about the not-for-profit. We do have 2 boards. We have the policy board, which is all residents. The president and vice president and CFO do sit on the board. They do not have voting rights at all. They're employees. There is a BRSI board. It's a service board. That is where our 501c3 comes into play. And there is somebody who needs to, at least one person, that needs to be outside of the community to sit on that board. But the rest of the board members are residents also. We're a 25-year-old community. It's worked wonderfully. So congratulations. I think everybody should be on board.
Could you identify your community?
It's Beaumont Retirement Community in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania.
As somebody said, all CCRCs are different.
Yeah, let me just add to that, as a matter of fact, when this law was passed, there were a number of communities in New Jersey that had a resident trustee situation long before that. So there are many communities that really have done this and done it very well. And Erickson, that many of you know, has had, I believe, a resident trustee since the time it was founded. It was part of the philosophy of, I believe it was John Erickson who was the first. But at any rate, so I'm not saying that it was a problem with everybody. And it's not, the law didn't change things for some, the communities that already had the boards of trustees before.
One thing I would like to add to Mariana's comments, Leading Age is concerned with this governance task force that's been in place this past year of exploring ways to find more training for board members. And in an unusual move, this committee has 3 residents on the Leading Age Committee on this governance task force, and Mariana and I are 2 of the 3.
For what sounds like a successful arrangement, is there a definition of what kind of topics or issues or decisions can be made in the executive session that would maybe exclude the resident board directors, that limits what could happen in executive session? Or would it be a case of going from getting in the boardroom but not getting into, or not being excluded from executive sessions where almost everything is handled?
Well, the California statutes in California, the continuing care statutes outline under what situations does a resident representative, not only the resident board member. The resident board members in the board member who is a resident but was not elected by the residents, they are involved in the executive sessions. But the California statute outlines what conversations that take place in executive session needs to be attended by the resident reps who are not board members.
In Virginia, in 2012, one of our senators, Senator Barker, conducted a year-long study of CCRCs. And this included the Housing Commission, which sponsored it, the Department of Insurance, the Department on Aging, the Leading Age affiliates in Virginia, VANHA, VACRA, the Residents Association, and Catherine Pearson was one of the persons who testified in that year-long study. The year-long study produced 7 recommendations. And it's amazing how those 7 recommendations matched 7 recommendations that were produced by a 1992 study. In 2013, we have heard nothing, 0, about that study. I mean, is a study an end in itself?
I would just add to that, and this is something that Gene Hurley, who just spoke, may be aware of. The Department of Corporations of the state of Virginia, on its website, points out that there is no regulation of CCRCs in the state of Virginia, and that anyone considering moving to a CCRC should take that into account and be very cautious in making that decision. So, although it may be true, I don't know the regulatory situation there, but when the chief regulator cautions people about making a move, I think that's quite significant.
You're from Virginia. Do you have any thoughts on that? Well, I also served on that study committee, and I agree with everything Gene Hurley just said.
Well, I am also from Virginia, and you should move to my CCRC because we have high levels of resident participation. So my question isn't so much about how you formulate or come up with a plan to get residents involved. I'm interested with the next step. So this is a question to one of the residents. They can answer the question. After you've had a high level of participation, they've been involved in the process, And you've gotten to the next point where I want an example of a time when maybe contrary to overwhelming resident opinion, the decision was still made despite of that overwhelming opinion because of whatever reason that may be. I'm interested in the tango that exists after you come up with that participation.
Would you identify yourself, please?
I'm Andy Schweitzer. I work for Williamsburg Landing in Williamsburg, Virginia.
Well, the obvious answer is rate increases. Because you're going to get residents who say they don't think the rate should go up so much, and the rate does go up. So that's clearly an example of something where the resident opinion may have been enthusiastic on one side, and that didn't cut any ice when the final decision was made. Although our residents are included in the financial study group that makes the recommendations on things like that. If management decides the rate increase is going to be 5%, it's going to be 5%, whether the residents like that or not. Oh, excuse me.
I can speak from my experience. I live in a community that's about 20 years old, and almost from the inception, it's had representation on the board, first with just one resident, and that didn't turn out well. That resident happened to be preoccupied with how hot the soup is. But our CEO at that time, working with the chairman of the board, decided to solve the problem by adding another resident. And there's times when they can support each other, and there are times when my cohort on the board disagreed with me. But I think everyone benefited from that experience. We have an excellent working relationship in our community with management. The Finance Committee has an opportunity to review the operating budget and the capital development budget. During the time that I served on that committee, I saw management change its mind on priorities for capital expenditures because of the concerns and the suggestions raised by the residents. Then I've seen the other side. At the end of the day, management decides. And that's the way it should be. And I think the community accepts that. And I think residents have a responsibility to communicate that to residents that somehow think that it should work another way. At the end of the day, management has the final call. And our residents in the community recognize that, and that's a big reason why it works so well.
We're going to have to put closure on this. I want to say again what I suggested in the beginning. I think we've had a lot of really good conversation from our resource people on this panel, and I'd like you to give them a hand. We have one other request here, and a member of the board of NECRA is going to ask you for a favor.
Well, no, I'm not going to ask you for a favor. I'm going to tell you what your continuing education credit depends on. And that is taking one of the packets, that is your resident engagement packet, and it comes with a red-hot envelope in it. And in that envelope, you can respond to an invitation to be a part of the resident network that is called the National Continuing Care Resident Association. You got a wonderful periodical that we send, and visit us in 3545 booth downstairs, or no, wherever we are. We're in the basement upstairs, and we'll talk to you more then. We don't have time now. 3545 in the exhibit hall by the model home, and ushers will be at the door to give you these.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Don't forget, if you need credit, continuing education credit, scan out. We have one machine here and one outside the door. Outside.